Welcome to another edition of From the Front Lines, where we discuss both the day-to-day and one-of-a-kind issues facing real estate managers. Our topic today is lease securitization, and I'm here with Marissa Limsiaco, president and co-founder of Otso, who writes corporate guarantees on behalf of tenants to provide an alternative to traditional lease securitization. Welcome, Marissa.
Thanks so much for having me, Suzanne.
So, Marissa, would you say attraction of new deals or retention of existing tenants is more important right now in today's market?
Well, I guess the cop-out answer to that would be, how full is your building? But I think in general, with everything evolving and expectations of tenants, especially from, at the forefront of everybody's minds right now, especially as landlords, is wanting your businesses and tenants to come back to your space is obviously safety and security. Whereas obviously attracting new deals and filling up space is always just as important as retaining, I think a lot of the focus right now in today's environment is, okay, what changes have to be made to keep these tenants here? Because if they stay, we'll obviously keep on attracting. But yeah, I think the level of safety, security, overall tenant experience has evolved as in the last year. So I'd say existing tenancy is on the forefront of a lot of people's minds.
Absolutely. We always hear it's easier to keep your existing tenant than to seek out a new tenant. Along those lines, how do landlords mitigate some of the risks we're seeing right now?
Yeah, well, you have your traditional methods like the letters of credit, your cash deposits, personal guarantees are leveraged as well. As a landlord, and we're landlords ourselves, the founders of our company, our biggest frustration is that gap of upfront cost versus collateral. The risk that you're putting in paying for the TI and the broker commission, putting that tenant in versus the collateral we collect is typically large, that gap. And so that's why we're excited about what we've built with Otso, is we're helping landlords close that gap in coverage. They're leveraging us to ask tenants to commit to more securitization, and because it's not onerous and they're not putting cash down or locking up any capital, Otso's been a valuable solution to landlords, especially in today's environment.
And in today's environment, have you seen since COVID, has that risk reward balance shifted or changed at all in regard to leasing for owners and operators?
Absolutely. You've got an environment where big companies like Starbucks were leaving, and so all of that, I know, and we can get into this too, is just the importance of assessing the tenant credit worthiness. Is definitely a big topic and extremely important now, is when you're bringing in new tenants, like how are you assessing those tenants when, big companies like even these Starbucks types and corporates of the world evolving and changing, leaving your space to work remote. So that is essentially been even more important, is this, with all the risk that I'm putting to put this tenant in, how much, collateral do I ask for? How do I measure and balance that risk out?
And so what are landlords doing to assess that credit worthiness or the risk of a potential tenant?
Yeah, the landlords, your REITs and your bigger ownership groups they have like teams and whatnot typically to do the underwriting and all of that. But the majority of landlords you'll see is your typical regional local ownership groups, and like myself, and we look for sources and uses, tax documents. Your team does as much as they can to look at projections, balance sheets, and whatnot. And some of that could be onerous. And what we built Otso for was to help streamline that and make it less onerous. With us, we allow tenants will essentially apply, and you get a full financial report as a landlord when tenants apply through Otso, to kind of take out that friction that's in the deal. So that's been something innovative and exciting that we've seen happen, especially in the last year.
I'd imagine this makes the leasing process a little more efficient and smooth for all parties. How have you seen Otso impact leasing?
Yeah, so landlords love us because it really impacts them in three different ways. On top of what I mentioned with the value add of like having additional coverage and closing that gap between upfront costs and what you're collecting in collateral. But it's also a differentiator. We have some of our customers are attracting tenants by saying, hey, we're offering, deposit-free leasing. Here's an opportunity for you. So there's an attraction sentiment there. And obviously tenants would love to, keep that cash or letter of credit, like capital unlocked for themselves. And also it's the transparency. We provide 2 years of cash management financials to our customers. So it's them having all of that information up front in a matter of minutes for the most part, has really taken out that friction point. I can't tell you how many deals and brokers I've talked to where it's like, oh, we're interested in this space, but I know the friction, there's going to be a friction point at the creditworthiness of this tenant because they've only been in business for X amount of years, and so that's been super exciting to kind of see how we're taking that friction out and making the leasing process more efficient.
Well, it's really changing the game. Does the way, negative events like a default, how does that impact properties now coming out of the pandemic?
At the end of the day, your value and real estate's pretty simple, right? It's filling up that space. And what are you doing to fill up that space? And sometimes I think you get lost in the Excel sheet, and at the end of the day, you forget like that is the most important thing is having that tenant occupy that space. And so, with COVID and everything going on, and this evolution of businesses going to more flex spaces or going fully remote, absolutely defaults have impacted a bit harder, especially those landlords out there that are in those markets where vacancy has risen a ton. It's obviously different market to market, but in general, there's certainly a bigger impact on those defaults in the current environment.
And of course, inflation is always present. Dollars are worth less over time. What should landlords look for to really maximize the yield on in the current environment?
We're seeing a lot of landlords, especially with like the vacant spaces, you're seeing this massive, and I think before the pandemic, we already saw this happening, is this evolution to flex spaces to maximize, to get to lease that space. And so we're seeing this, especially in the last like 4 to 6 months alone, this evolution of not only like co-working, flex spaces like standing up left and right, but also seeing like landlords evolving their spaces and turning them into flex spaces. So that's, it's all about the tenant experience and filling that space again. Tenants are looking for more flexible options for shorter terms in some cases. And so we've seen, landlords evolve to that. Second to that is also just in general, the whole tenant experience. I've mentioned this a couple times, but landlords thinking about how much outdoor space do I have available in my property? If you're thinking kind of from a retail mindset, do I have a roof that I can leverage to attract people? Can I extend out anywhere outdoor space, especially with everything going on? And so those are the two things: is how are they adjusting their space to accommodate everything that's going on, to keeping people feel safe and secure in the current environment.
For sure. Well, it sounds like Otso is really a win-win for the landlord and the tenant. Thank you so much for sharing, Marissa.
Thanks so much for having me.
Visit IREM.org for more knowledge to take on real estate management's most dynamic challenges. That's www.irem.org.